Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And I'll admit this week felt kind of slow and lethargic in weird ways, where even the injections of punk and metal to galvanize things didn't quite get all the way there. More's the pity. But hey, there's gotta be something here, so let's get on the pulse. So we've got 8 albums on the docket this week, but let's go back a couple months and talk about, from 4 years strong, Brain Pain. My back, and I swear on anything you want me to after that. I've heard that. Okay, so you all know now that I've been an advocate in favor of the heavier, more thought-provoking, and diverse expansions of the most recent wave of pop-punk and emo. But what I didn't really mention was that there were some bands that laid some of the groundwork of this in the mid-2000s, blending in elements of chunky metalcore with pop-punk for what became colloquially known as easycore. And into that scene came 4 Years Strong, which fans have cited as epitomizing a lot of that subgenre. And I don't know what to tell you, for someone who likes the modern brand of it, 4 Years Strong didn't really win me over that much. They had a couple striking moments, a few really good hooks, and a ton of shouty energy, but I think the early albums kind of missed the message that pop-punk was evolving both in lyrics and composition, and they took a while to get there. But hey, this is their first album after a long 5-year hiatus, and it's a 4 Year Strong album. I mean, it's not like the compositional style or delivery has evolved or changed much at all in 15 years. Maybe fleshing out the bass lines a bit more and sounding a bit more textured, which is welcome, and a larger lyrical focus on mental health. It certainly feels more contemporary, but 4 Years Strong is the furthest thing from subtle or nuance, so most of this winds up feeling like more of a framing device for the sort of relationship angst and adolescent boredom that has dominated pop-punk for decades now. And it doesn't really give the brighter Sum 41 imitation moments that much unique punch. Now, if you're into that sound, you'll certainly find this agreeable. A lot of big chunky riffs, big hooks backed up by a lot of personality behind the mic, some heavy breakdowns that are perfect for the pit, the well-placed ballad in the back half that shows up a little bit more maturity with the strings to boot, the warping, synth-driven closer that frankly sounds like nothing else on the album and honestly wasn't bad, but again, nothing here you haven't heard before. It can absolutely run together, and some of the drum production is weirdly inconsistent for a project that's looking to hit as hard as this does. Still, you know what? It's solid for what it is, so extremely light 7 out of 10. If this sort of sound that's a borderline throwback these days is up your alley, I don't know, go ahead. Check it out. Next up, from Westside Gunn, Pray for Paris. Sort of mouthpiece. Name's West, but I'm from the East. Hey, yo. It feels strange that I haven't talked about the Griselda Collective properly in one of my reviews yet. They're easily one of the most potent hotspots in rap music, but just a step away from the mainstream, and their fusion of grimy subject matter with textured samples and a wealth of strong guest verses have won them a ton of acclaim with a lot of hip-hop traditionalists. And yet, I'll admit I've been a little bit distant from them, partially because they remind me a lot of Rock Marciano and how they can have texture and a lot of taste, but can start running together in the content with a casual indifference to any sort of hook, but also partially because I've not heard a full project that's felt as forward-thinking and potent across the board in production and content as a lot of their marketing has suggested. But you know what, even among that camp, Westside Gunn hasn't really won me over. He leans a lot more heavily on flash and a lot of yelping attitude, and let's not forget the ad-libs that are as loud as his actual bars, and it just hasn't hit with the same power. And while the album is certainly more lush and relaxed, it falls into a lot of the same patterns. Yeah, the fluttery elegance of the samples and the pianos off the more dusty percussion, it's tasteful, and everyone here can rap on this production really well, but if you ask what more it adds beyond the opulent brand names flex juxtaposed with the occasional splash of grisly gang violence, sorry, you're not gonna come up with all that much. Hey, you know what? Maybe that's fine if you just want all that luxurious vibe. I'm well aware this is going to play very differently to a different audience. But I'm sorry, there's not a lot of smoother groove to flesh out the low end, and it's not like Westside Gunn is a great singer or a suave presence to sell this all that well. More annoyingly, it's missing a lot of that populism that I like in my favorite Flex songs, where it's not just that they have it, but you can have it as well. I mean, the closest thing we get to any added complexity, unsurprisingly, comes from Freddie Gibbs, and maybe newfound Griselda affiliate Boldy James, but the most unsettling verse came from Keisha Plum, if only because of her dead-eyed delivery and graphic detail against Tyler the Creator's production. And you know what, if I'm going to recommend this for anything, it is the production. DJ Premier and The Alchemist, they contribute as well, and even some of the more warped moments, this is an easy album to like on just the instrumentals alone. I just wish there was more that's actually being said. That's all, so strong 6 out of 10? Maybe just not for me. Next up, from Anchor and Braille, Tension. So here's something that's sadly become a little too common for me as a music critic. You hear about a band that you don't recognize, or maybe you know the name but nothing else. You see that they've got something of a devoted following, so you go in to check out what the hell the sound is, and then you wonder why on earth anybody really cares that much. Okay, you know what, that's harsh, but Amberlin kinda is one of those projects for me, and this is a side venture from their frontman. And I went through the Anchor and Braille back catalog briefly, and I'm sorry, there's just not a lot to say about it. Very lightweight, very clean pop rock that's going even further into fluttery ambience. It's about a half step removed from royalty-free commercial music with every single album. And you know what, that might be your thing. I'm not going to begrudge you that, but it's not mine. Mostly because said frontman Stephen Christian leans very heavily on his falsetto to some rather flimsy and basic writing, with some of the religious undercurrent that doesn't surprise me coming from an act signed to tooth and nail, but it's not all that transgressive or interesting. But okay, 4th album of the project, and man, I'm not sure it was a good or bad thing that a project this breezy and lightweight in a very 80s inspired way dropped around the same time as the 1975. We'll get to them. Because it forces an inevitable and unfortunate comparison, not helped by that tinny graininess that tends to touch the very top of the synths and percussion, both of which this album relies on heavily given the lack of strong melodic bass lines. And that's an odd thing to note on a project that's trying to sound so breezy and airy with the reverb guitar pickups and the occasional driving hook and flashy solo. If you're not getting anything close to an edge, why not add at least some sort of coursing foundation and groove rather than concessions to modern pop that can feel increasingly stiff and leaden? Especially when you're going to go for a more contemporary drop and the colorless production just sounds awful. It once again lands the majority of the focus on Stephen Christian's vocals and the songwriting, and okay, while he sounds fine enough, maybe not my thing, but I get the appeal, the lyrical content feels basic as all hell, and some pretty underwhelming love songs that are not sold well enough to rise above their cliches that are the furthest thing from dangerous or mad. Again, it's got so little distinctive melodic impact or punch that I guarantee in a week or so, I'll forget this exists. So, strong 5 out of 10, only for the fans. Next up, from Caligula's Horse, Rise Radiant. Alright, prog metal band out of Australia that's gotten some critical acclaim and prime touring spots throughout the 2010s and going in cold. Oh, I hear the appeal. I wouldn't really call them a particularly dynamic or innovative band in prog metal, and I'm not sure I've been all that impressed by their hooks or their lyrics, but they had some really pretty melodies driven off of great guitar work and decently layered vocals. And when they went full gent in spots, they didn't completely pitch the tune out the window. That's the good approach. What I'm saying is that, while I doubt I would ever seek out a band like Caligula's Horse, I've heard a lot like them in progressive metal. They were good enough that I wouldn't object to them either, and on this album, well, it certainly is some prog metal from Caligula's Horse, alright. Same airy vocals and falsetto, same casual indifference to structure or truly potent dynamics, which you might be able to excuse thanks to some interesting bass and guitar lines, and some amazingly smooth production, at least until the gent parts drop in. Same frustrating soft-focused drum and percussion production, and while it is easy to like in the moment, I hate to say this again, but ask me and remember much of this later on, I'll just give you a helpless shrug. That's what happens when you treat hooks and dynamics as optional, folks, and it's not helped by ending the album with 2 covers that have more memorable tunes and hooks than the rest of your album. But alright, fine. One thing Caligula's Horse doesn't get as much credit for is how they try to embrace more conceptual storytelling in their lyrics, so maybe that's what would set them above, right? Honestly, not really. We get a number of isolated stories about endurance and overcoming bad odds and hard times as the underdog, objecting to unjust authority but finding peace of mind in love as we will ascend, of which I wouldn't really complain, except without much of an arc or concrete differentiation, these songs really run together. Going for a lack of dynamics again, this time in the poetry, going for broad abstraction along with it leads to a project that's pleasant but can't really cut that much deeper. Now, again, if none of this bothers you, it's fine enough progressive metal, it's getting a light 6 out of 10, but like me, don't be surprised if you don't remember much of it down the line. Just saying. Next up, from Unreqvited, Empathica. Yes, I went Bandcamp diving again for black metal, and I'm actually pretty happy with the results, as when this comes to atmospheric black metal, this one-man Canadian project has shown some real growth since the latter half of the 2010s, sharpening up the production and delivering even more sweeping, symphonic touches, which to me seems like an extended Nightwish reference given the title of this album and a couple songs, but it also trickles down to some of the compositions in a good way. And on this project, well, assuming you can move past the vocals that are so buried and shredded that the album is basically instrumental, it's really solid. It's well-paced, it's well-balanced, the melody lines are pretty sticky when they have to be, and pretty meditative when necessary across some of the arranged elements and the pianos and the guitars. The crescendos are pretty credible, and the shifts from strings-accented symphonic swell to some frenetic black metal, they're well executed. Even if I think this album would be ripe for a few really great solos just to drive it home. I'll also say, in addition to not having a ton of striking standout moments, it does start to run short of momentum by the final few songs that look to get a little bit more downbeat and muted. Even if the atmosphere feels appropriately windswept and haunted, it's definitely more of a mood album than one I'm inclined to go back to for specific songs, but that's okay for this brand of black metal. Still, I've heard a promising progression here, and a few more tweaks could make this great, so, I don't know, light 7 out of 10? If this is your thing, it's worth hearing. Next up, from Jeff Rosenstock, No Dream. When I caught a reflection of you and me. Jeff Rosenstock albums always seem to drop at the opportune times, don't they? The timing and the searingly potent but nuanced catharsis that both Worry and Post delivered felt like such gut shots at that time that I've seen punks pause a couple months later to really consider how much those moments held up. And while the answer there has been a little mixed, Worry is still great, but Post is kind of patchy and probably got overpraised by a lot of folks hopping on the bandwagon, and I include myself in that. But I was curious how well No Dream would hit in a pretty weird point when time itself started to morph into an amorphous blob in increasingly irrelevant moments. And, well, there's a similar feeling that I have that across a number of Jeff Rosenstock's songs, I'm starting to notice it. They're smart, they're punchy, they're really potent on impact, but they don't have a lot of staying power, and we start to repeat themes and ideas from previous albums for more broad appeal, it becomes all the more obvious. I mean, the best moments on Worry, they worked because they were specific, whereas for as much as I like his self-flagellation at Fame and indulging in the system at Patches where Richie kinda hates himself, by turning inward so much, the songs don't quite have the same firepower by going for generalities. And while the through line of anxiety and exhausted depression, it's got relatability and firepower, if only because Jeff Rosenstock is gonna howl through it, it can start to get actively draining, from the dilapidated tours to just how much cynical participants in the system will just pitch real punk rebellion to the side without much in the way of progress or hope. Kind of ironic I'm making it now, but just saying. But alright, fine, it's not particularly nihilistic. That is, until we get Old Crap where he says, it's not angst, the world's just fucked. And you know what, at least we get some of the moments that have that slapdash, full-throated presence off of choppy, flattened, grinding riffs. Then I can't be the only one who thinks that some of the vocal mixing and acoustic texture tacked onto a lot of blown-out squeals and fuzz is starting to distort from the melodic punch that's always been this band's secret strong suit, especially when the bass grooves aren't quite as defined. I don't know, folks. Jeff Rosenstock is normally an act I can go to for a lot of smart, about killer punk rock, and normally I would be all over it, but I'm sorry, this kind of fell flat. Blurring together and regurgitating a lot of themes and ideas we've seen him do before and do better. So, strong 6 out of 10. Really wish I liked it more. Next up from Rae Jepsen, Dedicated Side B.
Don't go wasting your nights getting solo.
It's kind of funny that Rae Jepsen's B-sides, or what her label claims are B-sides, they wind up as consistently strong as her formal album releases, or even in some cases maybe even surpassing them. While I slightly disagree with the assessment that Emotion Side B is better than the original article, I can see the argument. And thus, while I still consider Dedicated a bit of a lateral move from Emotion, it gave me one of my favorite songs of 2019, and thus I was excited to see if the quality remained high here. And you know what, for the most part, it's true, as we once again got a really damn good, if not quite great, project. She remains a potent and very emotive performer with a lot of charisma. The songs are at their best when they punch a little bit more than just beyond the love-struck hookup. I mean, Solo is an anthem to the one-man party, it's the best example, but I really like the cautious pullback of Heartbeat and the search for internal stability that came on Comeback with Bleachers. And the actual songs themselves, they can feel very dependent on the production team that she pulls together. I mean, when you've got the more lush and balanced production from Jack Antonoff and Ariel Rechtshaid, you normally wind up with a lot of quality, but getting cuts from Jack and Coke or Oak, the production quality is going to take a dip. I'd also add that while there are a fair few standouts, and songs like Let's Sort This Whole Thing Out, they're so aggressively sweet and chipper, kind of calling back to Rae Jepsen's very beginning, they're hard for me to dislike. I'm not sure all of her experimentation clicks, as there are a couple songs that show her going through a gauzy, vaporwave-esque tone that might be more glamorous, but don't really flatter her more breathy, more straightforward delivery. She's slowly gotten better with tones that are more R&B and funk, and that's true here too, but this feels like territory for which she's not quite as familiar. And going back to the lyrics, I do think this album could start to seem a bit single-minded with its hookups. With a little bit more detail, that could have helped differentiate more of these songs. But otherwise, once again, really damn solid, strong 7 out of 10, definitely recommended. And finally, from the 1975, Notes on a Conditional Form. Let me get serious for a second. After the end of last year, I didn't know if I was going to be able to listen to the 1975 in the same way again. No, I'm talking about 2019, not 2018, where I was just burned out at the end of that year and had to struggle through an overlong, frustrating slog that had its high points but also its cavernous lows. No, in 2019 I actually saw the 1975 live, and they were excellent, better than I had ever expected, to the point where some of the songs from A Brief Inquiry to On Rotten Relationships, they actually sounded way better. But after that, I actually had a really bad breakup with the person I was seeing who was a huge fan of this band. Anyone who saw my videos in the last months of 2019 understood the emotional toll that took on me, and it left me at a point where I was genuinely worried if some of those scars would prevent me from hearing the music in the same way ever again. Now, thankfully, I don't know if it was the distance or therapy at the right moments that let me help achieve the right kind of closure, but my opinions on the 1975 are stable. And thus I was dreading another overlong, auto-tune bloated project that had been delayed countless times. The rollout's been terrible. And let me make this clear. This is absolutely too long, bloated with the dreamy post-rock digressions that are less explosions in the sky and more the August Rush soundtrack, or forays into jungle-inspired electronics or some blatant pulls from Jamie XX that add up to far less than the sum of their parts. If anything, they sound more like the placeholders or interlude music played between stage changes at a concert, and they don't need to be on an album. But even focusing on the more conventionally structured songs, well, if you were expecting more of the frenetic electronic rock energy of People, be prepared for the bait and switch, because there's nothing close to that here, as the rock sides of this album either flirt with even more restrained, easy listening pablum, or slightly more blown out tracks that make me think that Matt Healy is full of even more shit than usual. He may have said in interviews he's going for pure pop stardom, maybe even getting a bit subversive, but normally that comes with stronger hooks and less obvious pulls from modern bedroom pop and emo, maybe even with a splash of dream country to boot. Factor in some truly abysmal sequencing, and the most stark observation is just how much this album sounds assembled from a half dozen different recording sessions where none of the ideas really coalesced into much, and where Matt Healy, on which a lot of this band's firepower and charisma depends, like on the last project, seems a lot more willing to fall into the background with listless delivery, auto-tune, and pitch correction. You can tell this was a troubled production. And all this takes us to the content, and you know what? I'll say this. I'm almost kind of glad the bait and switch of people happened so early for the rest of the album to wallow in half-formed midnight debauchery where thoughts and emotions are as fragmented as they come. It kind of dispels the illusion that they're trying to make grander statements than they can conceivably otherwise land, where even they try to blow off people taking them all that seriously for their politics on Roadkill, as if a band that's made political statements should be expected to be informed on what they're talking about, or have better timing, Healy. But that's the thing. If they were just going to stay in the blurry, drunken, half-earnest millennial haze, a more textural experience than grounded one, I might actually get behind it. But then we get these starkly earnest moments like Jesus Christ 2005, God Bless America with Phoebe Bridgers sounding excellent, or like Nothing Revealed, Everything Denied, which sounds like a call-out to acts who aren't challenging ideas. Might want to look in the mirror here, guys. Or the straightforward love letter to the band on Guys. Or If You're Too Shy, Let Me Know, which is the most obvious 1975 sounding song on the album. It's the most direct, and it's also easily the best. And I'm left questioning how any of this adds up to a lot more. I mean, the best moments are the most direct, they're the most punchy, but they're also fewer and far between amidst a deconstructed formula that doesn't really add up to anything more, and really doesn't challenge any ideas or power structures. Healy has gone on about how subversive they want to be in their experimentation so he doesn't get bored, but when your subversion doesn't land any punches amidst more direct moments that do, it only reinforces the feeling of a band that's believing all their own hype, but not really holding themselves to any sort of refined standard as a result, or actually taking a real stand. And honestly, that's their prerogative, but it doesn't make the album feel any less bloated, fractured, formless, and lacking even the best moments of A Brief Inquiry. So even if I don't think this has the complete duds of that album either, like Love It If We Made It, which is still a terrible song, I'm still giving this a 5 out of 10. And maybe even some of the fans are lukewarm on this one, because it is not as catchy. I don't know. Choice up to you with this one. Take whatever notes you want. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. Bit of a long set of reviews here, but I had a lot to say about the 1975. Shocker. Beyond that, if you got comments, leave them down there below. And once again, I understand at this time if you don't want to contribute to my Patreon, because again, hard times seemingly only seem to be getting worse, but if you do and want to impact my schedule, links right over there. But until then, I'm Mark. You're watching On the Pulse on Spectrum Pulse. And I'll see you next time.